Chapter 12 Mindtap Part 2, After Class Mastery. Note, recommend only watching this if you want more practice with Chapter 12. Otherwise, just watch Part 1. Question 1a. Engagement Activity. The Freud and Jung Letters. The Freud and Jung Letters. Upon their first meeting, Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung had a 13-hour conversation. Over the next 80 years, these two friends would write hundreds of letters to each other detailing their budding careers. Both would come to be among the most noted theorists in psychology, but their friendship would end when their academic disagreements no longer fostered a cordial relationship. Read this letter from Jung to Freud, and answer the questions that follow. Question 1. Excerpts letter from Jung to Freud, the 1st of October, 1909. Dear Professor Freud, here I stand on your doorstep with a letter of welcome to greet you in Vienna on resumption of work. For my part, I have got down to it in real earnest. I feel in top form and have become much more reasonable than you might suppose. My wife is bearing up splendidly under the psychoanalysis and everything is going a merveille. On the journey back to Switzerland I never stopped analyzing dreams and discovered some priceless jokes. A pity there's no time for this now. How are you? And the stomach? Well, I hope. I have leafed through Stransky's opus and find it really stupid. A long letter from Forel awaited me, inviting me to participate in an organization of psychotherapists. I do not find the prospect alluring. What to do? I should be glad of your views soon as I haven't yet answered Forel. It is amazing how our work is spreading among the primary school teachers here. A young teacher was with me today, asking for advice. For months he has been treating his severely hysterical wife with good results and extraordinary understanding. He is also treating one of his pupils who suffers from a phobia. The scalpel is being cold-bloodedly wrested out of the doctor's hands. What do you say to this? The young man also tells me that in Zurich people have started calling me names, particularly colleagues. Understandable, because now their reputation is at stake. One must let the forest fire rage. There's no stopping it now. In Zurich a Dr. Bircher, please note the name, has set up as a psychoanalyst. Formerly he believed in uric acid and applesauce porridge. Naturally he hasn't a clue. He is very much to be warned against, especially as he is much in vogue and assiduously avoids personal relations with me. No galas yet of the Jabach. All's well with my family, and I hope with yours too. Most cordial regards, yours, Jung. The theories developed by Freud and Jung originated in part from their interactions with clients. From the details of the letter, which of the following can you assume was a component of their clinical practices? A. Dream analysis. B. Bloodletting. C. Homeopathic remedies. D. Hypnosis. It's a dream analysis. Explanation. Jung writes to Freud that he never stopped analyzing dreams on his journey back to Switzerland. Dream analysis was definitely a cornerstone to both of their careers, and it remains a point of interest to many of their followers. Hypnosis is not mentioned in this letter, although Freud and Jung both used this method in their clinical practices. Neither bloodletting nor homeopathic remedies were mentioned as being used by Freud or Jung in this letter. Question 1b. The theories developed by Freud and Jung were often met with criticism. Which of the following passages from the letter highlights the beginning of this criticism? A. The scalpel is being cold-bloodedly wrested out of the doctor's hands. B. I have leafed through Stransky's opus and find it really stupid. C. I feel in top form and have become much more reasonable than you may suppose. D. The young man also tells me that in Zurich people have started calling me names, particularly colleagues. It's D. The young man also tells me that in Zurich people have started calling me names, particularly colleagues. Explanation. Jung mentioned someone telling him that people, especially colleagues, were beginning to call him names. You needed to assume that this name calling was the beginning of what would become intense criticism. The scalpel is being cold-bloodedly wrested from the doctor's hands is in reference to doctors relying less on physical methods of treatment and does not have to do with criticism. Jung feeling in top form is only in reference to his mood, something often mentioned between the two as a sign of their motivation for working. The comment made about Stransky's opus is actually a criticism on the part of Jung, not one directed at him. Question 2a2. The nature of personality. At the core of personality is the concept of consistency. What is consistency? Explanation. Consistency is a core concept to personality that allows researchers to analyze the unchanging behaviors of people across situations and over time. Observing stable behavior patterns gives researchers the ability to characterize different types of personalities. Question 2b. Select the graph that illustrates consistency in a person's personality. Explanation. Graph 1 is correct. Consistency is illustrated when a personality characteristic is stable over time, and on graph 1 the level of friendliness does not increase or decrease drastically. Question 1c. Elmery, Lebo, and Sedisi are all trying to swim across a strong current. The following scenarios describe their possible responses to swimming across the current. Select which scenario illustrates the concept of distinctiveness. Scenario 1. Elmery calmly decides to swim with the current. Lebo frantically turns around and goes back to shore, and Sedisi decides to try to swim against the current. Scenario 2. They all decide it is too difficult and desperately turn around to swim back to shore. Explanation. Scenario 1 is correct. Distinctiveness is illustrated when people do not act the same way in the same situation. Scenario 1 is the only scenario in which Elmery, Lebo, and Sedisi each have a different response to their shared situation. Contrasting responses illustrate how each person has his or her own distinct personality. Question 1d. Observing the fluctuations and balance in an individual's personality allows researchers to identify personality traits. Select the statement that includes a description of a personality trait. Sedisi is legally blind. Lebo drives a red truck. Elmery is helpful to other people. It's D. Elmery is helpful to other people. Explanation. A personality trait is a general description that refers to how a person usually acts. A statement that includes a description of someone being helpful is referring to a personality trait. The other statements do not include descriptions of personality traits, but simply personal circumstances or physical characteristics. Question 3a. Trait theories. The Big Five trait theorists often employ factor analysis, a type of statistical analysis, to condense the large number of personality traits into related clusters. One theory, the five-factor model, proposes that all personality traits can be condensed into 5 clusters. Identify which of the following is not one of the 5 core dimensions of the 5-factor model. A. Perfectionism. B. Agreeableness. C. Conscientiousness. D. Neuroticism. Explanation. Perfectionism is not a component of the 5-factor model. The 5-factor model is composed of the following 5 core dimensions: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. You can remember them by using OCEAN as an acronym. Question 3b. The following image represents the continuum for one of the 5 core dimensions of the 5-factor model, from one extreme to another. Type in the correct dimension that is described by these endpoints, between disparaging and kind. Explanation. Agreeableness is correct. This dimension describes how pleasant someone is when he or she interacts with others. People who score low on agreeableness are often described as unpleasant, offensive, and harsh. In contrast, those who score high tend to be warm, considerate, and responsive. Question 3c. The following graph illustrates a correlation between agreeableness and the number of friends a person has. Based on what you know about the 5 core dimensions, which of the following statements is the most likely reason for this relationship? People high in agreeableness place self-interest above getting along with others. People high in agreeableness are responsive to the needs of others. People high in agreeableness are more likely to be coercive with others. It's B. People high in agreeableness are responsive to the needs of others. Explanation. The graph illustrates that people who score higher in agreeableness will be more likely to have a larger number of friends. People high in agreeableness tend to be responsive to the needs of others, are apt to place their own interests behind the interests of others, and are less likely to be coercive. Question 4a. The psychoanalytic theory. Freud began his career as a physician, but he often found himself treating people for mental disorders. Through these encounters, he came to develop his psychoanalytic theory. Freud's structure of personality involves 3 components. The component that attempts to reduce the impulsiveness of personality is called the what? The component that attempts to reduce the impulsiveness of personality is called the ego. Explanation. Freud believed that your unique personality is a result of the interaction among 3 components: the id, the ego, and the superego. The ego is the component that operates by the reality principle. The ego is the moderator between the impulsive id and the social norms of your environment internalized by the superego. Question 4b. Freud believed that the id, ego, and superego are in constant conflict and that behavior arises from the resolution of these competing demands. For instance, Zukail is struggling with a fairly common dilemma. Zukail is trying to decide whether he should have a drink with friends after work or volunteer at the homeless shelter. Each structure of personality is likely to push him towards a different decision. Type the name of the personality structure that is most closely associated with each possible decision. Possible decision structure: go get a drink. A homeless person has never done anything for you. Volunteer at the homeless shelter for an hour, and then call your friends to meet for a drink. Volunteer at the homeless shelter and give something back to your community. Explanation: the id would recommend the most impulsive decision, the superego the most moral decision, and the ego the decision that compensates for both the impulsive id and the moral superego. In Zukail's case, the id would recommend going to get a drink, and the superego would recommend volunteering to give back to his community. The ego would recommend Zukail volunteer first and then go out for a drink, compromising between the id and superego. Question 4c. Just as Freud proposed 3 components of personality, he also proposed that there were 3 levels of awareness. Which level includes those thoughts and impulses that can be easily retrieved? Explanation: the preconscious level is correct. Freud used an iceberg analogy when describing his theory of the levels of consciousness. An iceberg sits mostly beneath the water surface, with only a small, exposed portion above the water. The part just below the surface of the water is the preconscious level. This level consists of thoughts, memories, or impulses that are just outside of awareness but can be easily brought to the conscious level. The conscious level consists of items that a person is aware of at a particular moment. The unconscious level consists of items of which a person is unaware. Question 5a. Defense mechanisms. Freud believed that people have internal struggles and conflicts. In identifying these conflicts, anxiety arises. Dealing with this anxiety is often done through the use of defense mechanisms. Select the correct description for each of the following defense mechanisms. Defense mechanism description: repression, displacement, regression, identification. Explanation: denial, refusing to accept or believe an unpleasant reality. Repression, burying distressing thoughts in the unconscious. Reaction formation, behaving in a way that is exactly opposite of your true feelings. Regression, reverting to immature patterns of behavior. Projection, attributing your own unacceptable thoughts and feelings to another. Rationalization, creating false excuses to justify unacceptable behavior. Compensation, overcoming a perceived weakness by excelling in a different area. Sublimation, channeling frustrated desires in a socially accepted way. Identify the correct defense mechanism illustrated in each of the following scenarios. Scenario 1: Sedisi impresses his girlfriend by falsely stating that his uncle is a famous movie star. Okay, so the website says the answer is displacement, because displacement involves diverting emotional feelings from their original source onto a substitute target. And Sedisi is taking out his frustration on the tire instead of on himself for parking illegally. But that's not what the question is asking. So the real answer would be regression. According to the textbook, a fired executive having difficulty finding a new job might start making ridiculous statements about his incomparable talents and achievements. Such bragging is regressive when it's marked by massive exaggerations that virtually anyone can see through. Question 5c. Scenario 2: Raffaello accuses her roommate of never cleaning the bathroom, when, actually, she was just feeling bad for not cleaning. Explanation: projection is correct. Projection involves attributing your own unacceptable thoughts and feelings to another. Raffaello is accusing her roommate of not wanting to clean, when, in fact, Raffaello does not want to clean. Question 5d. Identify which of the following is a disadvantage of using defense mechanisms. They can deceive you into believing you have dealt with anxiety surrounding a conflict, when really you have not. They protect you from being overwhelmed by anxiety. They allow the ego to ignore the primitive nature of the id and satisfy the superego. They can deceive you into believing you have dealt with anxiety surrounding a conflict, when really you have not. Explanation: The disadvantage of defense mechanisms is that you distort reality to make it seem that you have dealt with a conflict. This will not foster behavior change, and your personality will not grow as a result. Protecting your self-image is an advantage of defense mechanisms, but many argue against continued use. Dealing with the realities of life is necessary for a person to deal maturely with the world. Question 6a. Psychosexual development. Freud theorized that personality develops as a child progresses through a series of psychosexual stages. During each stage, physical pleasure is derived from a particular part of the body known as an erogenous zone. As the child moves from one stage to the next, the primary erogenous zone changes. Identify the correct description for each of the following stages. Explanation. He saw the stages of sexual development according to Freud. Stage description. Oral stage, 0-18 months. Pleasure is derived from the mouth and can come in the form of biting, chewing, or sucking. Anal stage, 18 months to 3 years old. Pleasure is derived from excretion of the bowels, and toilet training is critical to this stage. Phallic stage, 3-6 years old. Pleasure is derived from the genitals mostly through self-stimulation, and children develop an attraction for their opposite sex parent. Latent stage, 6 years old to puberty. Sexual feelings become dormant in this stage, and the focus of pleasure is through social interaction with peers. Genital stage, at puberty. Pleasure once again returns to the genitals, but this time from stimulation by opposite sex peers. Desires for the opposite sex parent are channeled to opposite sex peers. The capacity for social sexual relationships develops, and an adult sexuality is eventually achieved. Question 6b. Freud proposed that progressing through these stages will often leave a permanent mark on adult personality, especially if a person becomes fixated in a given stage. This fixation, which results from inadequate or excessive pleasure in a certain stage, is thought to hinder the development of a healthy personality. Read the following description of Fabo's fixation. Fabo is incapable of intimacy with peers of the same sex. He has always been afraid of his father and thinks that this tarnished relationship is carried over into his adult life. Using Freud's theory of psychosexual development, select the age at which Fabo's fixation most likely occurred. 4 years old, 2 years old, 10 months old. At 4 years old. Explanation. Fabo's fixation stems from disruption in the phallic stage. You need to recognize that the phallic stage occurs at 3-6 years old and that 4 years old is the choice that falls within this range. Freud would have theorized that there was an issue with Fabo resolving his Oedipus complex, and this caused his inability to form intimate relationships with same-sex peers. Question 7a. Neo-Freudians are theorists who agree with some components of Freud's psychoanalytic theory and disagree with others. Alfred Adler and Carl Jung are among Freud's most noted students and critics. For Alfred Adler and Carl Jung, identify a concept on which they did not agree with Freud and which they did not incorporate into their own respective theories. Explanation. Adler disagreed with Freud's emphasis on gratifying physical urges as the prime goal of life, and Jung disagreed with Freud's emphasis on sexual instincts. Question 7b. As part of creating his own theory of personality, Carl Jung further divided Freud's levels of awareness. Select the correct division for each description. Description term stores a person's unique, forgotten memories and experiences. Includes archetypes that provide evidence of a universal ancestral history. Explanation. Carl Jung incorporated Freud's concept of the unconscious, but divided it into the following two parts. Term description. Collective unconscious. This stores emotionally charged images and themes that are universal to people of all time periods and cultures. Jung referred to these as archetypes. Personal unconscious. This is most similar to Freud's idea of the unconscious. It includes a person's unique memories and experiences that are outside of conscious awareness. Question 7c. The following scenario illustrates the influence of both these divisions. Lebo and Christelle are having dinner together, and both have ordered the breaded pork cutlet. They are enjoying their meal and discussing their dreams from last night. Lebo starts talking about a frail, old man that he saw in his dream, and Christelle interrupts him to say she also dreamed about an old man. Lebo says that the dream reminded him of his grandfather's death, an event he hadn't thought of in many years. Christelle replies that she suddenly remembered the time she lost her grandfather's favorite ring. Both had forgotten these memories for some time. Identify which part of the scenario illustrates the influence of the collective unconscious. Lebo and Christelle both dreaming about an old man. Lebo and Christelle both eating the breaded pork cutlet. Lebo recalling a forgotten memory of his grandfather's death. It's Lebo and Christelle both dreaming about an old man. Explanation. The collective unconscious stores images and themes that are universal to people of all time periods and cultures. Lebo and Christelle having the same symbol of an old man in their dreams illustrates the influence of the collective unconscious. Evidence is often found in the similarities in art, literature, and religion around the world. The personal unconscious, on the other hand, includes a person's unique memories and experiences that are out of awareness. The memories that are unique to Lebo and Christelle, and previously out of their awareness, are illustrative of the personal unconscious. Question 8. While some of Freud's research methods and theories have been criticized, others are highly regarded as some of the most influential contributions to psychology today. Dr. Dlamini incorporates Freud's theories into her own clinical practice, but focuses only on the details that have survived scrutiny from generations of researchers. The following is a brief overview of what Dr. Dlamini and Isles, a new client hoping to understand the motivations behind her behavior, are currently discussing in therapy. Isles has recently lost her job because of her drinking habits. She tends to stay up late drinking, and cannot get up early enough to get to work on time. She convinces herself that staying up late drinking is not a problem because she has trouble sleeping anyway. She figures that if she is going to be awake during the night, she might as well be out enjoying herself. Identify the detail from Isles' therapy sessions that Dr. Dlamini is most likely to choose to investigate further: her recent job loss, other unconscious motives she may have for drinking, her inability to get up early enough to get to work. Explanation. Dr. Dlamini is most likely to focus on the other unconscious motives Isles may have for drinking. Although many may argue about the controversial details of Freud's interpretation of personality development, subsequent research has supported the following claims. A. Unconscious forces can influence a person's behavior. B. People regularly use defense mechanisms to reduce anxiety. C. A person's early childhood experiences can have an impact on his or her adult behavior. And D. Internal psychological conflicts can produce distress. Question 9a. Engagement activity. Locus of control. Have you ever taken a personality test? Try this one and see what you find out. Personality tests can be used to determine anything from the specific traits that make up your personality to your aptitude for a career option. For each set of statements to the right, select the radio button next to the statement that you agree with most. After completing the survey, answer the following questions. Assessment. Your mark depends on survey completion and your answers to the following questions. You will receive 4 points for completing the survey and 3 points for the questions. A green check mark will appear near each survey statement after you complete both the survey and the questions and submit your answers. Statement 1. Becoming a success is a matter of hard work. Luck has little or nothing to do with it. Statement 2. Getting a good job depends mainly on being in the right place at the right time. Points. 1. Statement 1. By taking an active part in political and social affairs, people can control world events. Statement 2. As far as world affairs are concerned, most of us are the victims of forces we can neither understand nor control. Points. 1. Statement 1. There is a direct connection between how hard I study and the marks I get. Statement 2. Sometimes I can't understand how teachers arrive at the marks they give. Points. 1. Statement 1. People are lonely because they don't try to be friendly. Statement 2. There's not much use in trying too hard to please people. If they like you, they like you. Question 9a. The statements you just read pertain to the concept of locus of control. Locus of control is the degree to which people believe they can control events in their lives. These beliefs fall on a continuum from internal locus of control to external locus of control. Each of the statements in the statement 1 column describes the beliefs of someone with a more internal locus of control. Each of the statements in the statement 2 column describes the beliefs of someone with a more external locus of control. Did you choose more statements in column 1 or column 2? Based on the content of the previous statements, which of the following is a correct description for an internal locus of control? Believing the events in your life are under your personal control. Believing the events in your life are not under your personal control. but rather the result of chance or fate, believing negative events to be under personal control, but positive events to be controlled by fate, believing the events in your life are under the control of a few high-powered individuals. It's a believing the events in your life are under your personal control. Explanation. Having an internal locus of control means that you believe the events in your life are under your personal control. People with an internal locus of control are likely to believe that hard work, perseverance, and personal choices are directly related to the events in their lives. People with an external locus of control are likely to believe that no matter the amount of hard work or perseverance, outcomes in life are never under their direct control. They believe environmental conditions, luck, or someone other than themselves controls their life events. Question 9b. When faced with a negative outcome, which of the following would most likely represent the response of a person with a more internal locus of control? I might as well give up. I can't make things turn out for the better. This is just going to keep happening. The universe is against me. I should have seen this coming. Next time I will make things happen differently. I just can't get a lucky break. Nothing will ever change for me. Explanation. A person with an internal locus of control would say, I should have seen this coming. Next time I will make things happen differently. People with a more internal locus of control perceive negative events in their lives to be under their own control, and thus, they feel they have the ability to change the outcome of a negative situation. They are more likely to take personal responsibility for the events in their lives and to be more proactive in making changes. Question 9c. Researchers have studied the relationship between locus of control and mental health and found that depending on where a person falls on the continuum, propensities for certain disorders change. In general, people with a high internal locus of control show resilience against developing depression. People with a high external locus of control, on the other hand, show increased susceptibility to depression. What aspect of having an internal locus of control gives people the resilience to avoid depression? An internal locus of control means that people are more likely to accept blame when negative events happen. An internal locus of control equips people to deal with uncertainty in life by attributing negative events to outside forces. An internal locus of control allows people to feel that they can actively take steps to improve their situations. An internal locus of control allows people to feel that they can actively take steps to improve their situations. Explanation. People who have an internal locus of control tend to accept responsibility for their successes and failures. As such, they feel more empowered to change their circumstances than people with an external locus of control. When things aren't going their way, there is something they can do about it. This type of thinking seems to make them more resistant to depression, compared to people with an external locus of control, who may feel powerless in the face of adversity. Question 10a10. Behavioral perspectives on personality development. Not until the 1950s did behaviorists identify an emphasis on overt behavior as important to understanding personality, shifting the focus from unobservable internal states to external environmental stimuli. Starting with Skinner's strict view of behaviorism, influential theorists have changed the landscape of behaviorism as it applies to the study of personality. Skinner's principles of what have been applied to personality, resulting in the idea that personality development is a what process. Skinner's principles of learning have been applied to personality, resulting in the idea that personality development is a lifelong process. Explanation. Skinner's concept of operant conditioning originated in the context of learning, but it has been recently applied to the area of personality. When the theory of conditioning is incorporated into personality development, an emphasis on continuous, lifelong personality development arises. Skinner believed that it is through the consequences of an action that a person's patterns for responding are developed. He termed these patterns of responding response tendencies and emphasized how reinforcement strengthens these tendencies. This emphasis on overt behavior highlights Skinner's strict, behaviorist belief that a person's conscious thought process should not be considered a factor in learning. Albert Bandura, representing the behaviorist tradition, has applied his theory of observational learning to personality development, emphasizing the importance of the models a person encounters. Mashadi, a 50-year-old data technician, is often described as cheerful and bright. To which of the following models has Mashadi most likely been exposed? Model 3, an alcoholic aunt who died at an early age of liver damage because she drank to feel happy. Model 2, A happy grandfather who would whistle while at a job site and was always assigned jobs because customers liked him. Model 1. An enthusiastic co-worker who was always overlooked for advancements because he was unable to give criticism. Explanation. A grandfather who whistled while he worked and always had jobs is the most likely model for maturity. When a model receives a positive consequence for a behavior, the observer is more likely to imitate that same behavior. Conversely, if the model receives a negative consequence for a behavior, the observer is more likely to behave in a way opposite to the observed behavior. You need to assume that because Mashadi is cheerful and bright, her model must have received positive consequences for the same behavior or negative consequences for the opposite behavior. The model that fits these parameters is the whistling grandfather who received positive consequences for being a happy worker, similar to being cheerful and bright. Question 10c. Bandura has furthered his analysis of personality development with his theory of reciprocal determinism, an integral component of social cognitive theory. This theory highlights the interaction between behavior, cognition, and the environment in analyzing personality. These interacting factors are illustrated by the following two diagrams. Each diagram represents one possible outcome based on a particular combination of environmental, behavioral, and cognitive factors. Anil moved away 12 weeks ago from her unhealthy township and toxic friends. She entered a substance abuse program and is about to be discharged as a sober woman. The descriptions of the cognitive and behavioral factors are provided for each possible outcome. Based on these factors, what is the likeliest environmental factor for each outcome? Explanation. Reciprocal determinism argues that people are not just victims of their environment. Rather, behavior is a result of the interaction among environmental, behavioral, and cognitive components. Each factor plays a role in a person's resulting environmental circumstances, exhibited behavior, and cognitive processes. For Anil, the cognitive and behavioral factors given in the first description reflect a more negative personality dynamic. Anil is finding it hard to resist drugs and starts to use drugs again. From these given factors, you needed to identify the most likely environmental factor contributing to this negative dynamic. Anil moving in with friends from her unhealthy township would be the most likely environmental factor to influence this negative dynamic. The second possibility reflects a more positive personality dynamic. Anil is finding it easy to resist and abstain from using drugs. You needed to assume that Anil moving to a new area, and away from her unhealthy township and old friends, would be the most likely environmental factor to influence this positive dynamic. Question 10d. Based on the differences that were illustrated by the two possibilities, which of the following statements is true of personality under the theory of reciprocal determinism? Personality is defined solely by inner, mental processes. Each factor is mutually exclusive of the others. Changes to one do not influence the others. A negative or positive change in one factor creates a domino effect in the other factors. The consequences of one's actions have the greatest influence on personality. A negative or positive change in one factor creates a domino effect in the other factors. Explanation. Reciprocal determinism argues that personality must be defined by three factors: environment, behavior, and cognition, and that these three factors are not mutually exclusive of one another. Behavior is determined by both one's environment and one's cognition. The environment one chooses to be in is determined by both one's behavior and one's cognition, and one's cognition is determined by both one's behavior and one's environment. This theory is not meant to be confusing or to assert that you have multiple personalities. Rather, it stresses the importance of highlighting more than one factor when identifying personality. The examples given previously illustrate how a negative or positive change in one factor can create a domino effect in the other two. Anil's personality changed based on the negative or positive aspect of the other two factors. Starting to use drugs again was a result of believing it is hard to resist using drugs and moving in with old friends. Abstaining from drug use was a result of believing it is easy to resist drugs and moving to a new area. Question 11a. Rogers's person-centered therapy. The humanistic perspective originated from the argument that previous theories were too deterministic in nature. Carl Rogers was one of the pioneers of the humanistic movement and developed person-centered therapy as a new way to treat patients. The following terms are components of Carl Rogers's perspective of personality development: Complete the table by identifying the correct description for the term provided. Self-concept, person-centered therapy, incongruence. Explanation. Each of the following terms is a component of Carl Rogers' perspective of personality development. Congruence. Self-concept has major overlap with actual experiences. Humanism emphasizes the idea that humans have control over their personal growth. Incongruence. Self-concept is inconsistent with actual experiences. Person-centered therapy emphasizes self-realization through encounter groups. Self-concept. Personal thoughts on typical behavior. Question 11b. Read the following scenario, and then answer the questions pertaining to Carl Rogers' person-centered therapy. Bongani recalls an instance when he was 11 and he tried to steal a chocolate bar. The shop owner called his parents, and he had to wait for them to pick him up. His parents looked worried when they arrived at the shop, and he assured them he had only wanted to steal the chocolate bar for the homeless person outside. He explained that he didn't have any more money, but that he told the person he would buy him some food. His parents told him he was bad for trying to break the law. They grounded him for 1 month and ignored him for the rest of the day. Based on the type of love presented, which of the following did this experience most likely foster in Bongani? Conformity, incongruence, congruence. Explanation. Incongruence is correct. Incongruence originates from conditional love, and the above scenario is an example of conditional love. Conditional love illustrates to children that they deserve affection only when they are behaving well or living up to their parents' expectations. This may make children feel as if they have to cover up their true self-concept, learning to hide the aspects of their self-concept that others find unacceptable. Bongani's parents ignoring him made him feel he did not deserve their affection. Question 11c. Which of the following statements would Bongani most likely make? I volunteer at a homeless shelter twice a week. I have constant anxiety when I come across homeless people now. Whenever I buy a coffee for myself, I buy one for the homeless person outside as well. Explanation. I have constant anxiety when I come across homeless people now is the correct answer. Bongani would most likely make this statement because of feelings of incongruence. Incongruence often results in recurring anxiety, or the blocking out, distorting, and denying of experiences that make a person feel unworthy of love. Bongani struggling with anxiety whenever he encounters homeless people is consistent with feelings of incongruence. Question 12 of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow served as a leader for the humanistic movement, and argued for a more optimistic view of human nature. He organized his view of personality development into a hierarchy, taking the shape of a pyramid. Select the missing labels in order to complete the pyramid. Esteem needs. B. Safety security needs. C. Physiological needs. D. Aesthetic needs. Explanation. Starting from the bottom of the pyramid, Maslow's hierarchy of needs includes the following: physiological needs, safety and security needs, belongingness and love needs, esteem needs, cognitive needs, aesthetic needs, and self-actualization needs. Maslow believed that human motives are organized into this hierarchy of needs, and that personality is a reflection of attempting to satisfy each of these needs. Question 12b. Select the correct description for each level of needs. Explanation. Physiological needs, basic biological needs, hunger and thirst, safety and security needs, long-term stability and protection from the elements, belongingness and love needs, acceptance by peers, and intimate relationships, esteem needs, independence, achievement, and recognition, cognitive needs, intelligence and comprehension, aesthetic needs, symmetry and creativity, self-actualization, seeking personal growth. Which of the following is true of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Basic needs must be met before less basic needs. Complete satisfaction is necessary to activate the needs at the next level. Needs at the top of the pyramid, like aesthetic and cognitive needs, are basic needs. Explanation. Basic needs must be met before less basic needs. Maslow believed that basic needs have to be adequately satisfied for you to begin to satisfy less basic needs. Basic needs begin at the bottom of the pyramid, and they become progressively less basic as you move up the pyramid. Needs do not have to be completely satisfied to activate the next level. If you have satisfied your basic needs moderately well, and begin to move up the pyramid, there are times when your basic needs become neglected. At this point, you regress down the pyramid to attempt to satisfy these more basic needs. Your personality is reflective of the needs you have satisfied, those you are attempting to satisfy, and those you are neglecting. Belongingness and love needs is correct. Said as he still meets with his co-workers, and you can assume he has a satisfactory feeling of affiliation and acceptance. Affiliation and acceptance are components of belongingness and love needs. Question 13a. Biological perspectives. Proponents of the biological perspective argue that personality is largely inherited, with recent research in this area supporting the notion that genes influence nearly all aspects of personality development. Hans Eysenck viewed personality structure as a hierarchy of traits. According to this theory, higher-order traits determine a handful of what. These in turn direct a person's what. Hans Eysenck viewed personality structure as a hierarchy of traits. According to this theory, higher-order traits determine a handful of lower-order traits. These in turn direct a person's habitual responses. Explanation. Hans Eysenck viewed personality structure as a hierarchy of traits. In this hierarchy, higher-order traits determine a handful of lower-order traits. These in turn direct a person's habitual responses. Eysenck believed that the higher-order traits, which direct all subsequent personality dynamics, are determined by a person's genes. Question 13b. Read the following scenario about physiological arousal, and answer the question that follows. Dr. Stein is researching physiological arousal as it relates to personality. She is connecting a number of participants to a device that will monitor skin conductance response on the hand. This area of the body has a number of sweat glands that respond when a person is in a state of arousal. The device will detect an increase in sweating on the skin that accompanies heightening arousal. Dr. Stein first has the participants wear the device while relaxing. This gives her a baseline of data to compare with subsequent data. After the baseline data are collected, all of the participants, who do not know each other, are asked to mingle in a room for 2 hours again while wearing the device. The following graphs illustrate level of arousal for 2 of Dr. Stein's participants. The blue line represents the baseline data, and the red line represents the data in the social setting. Which participant would most likely have the higher amount of conditioned inhibitions? Explanation. Participant 2 is correct. Eysenck theorized that introverts have higher levels of physiological arousal. Introverts tend to internalize their responses to social settings, and they become classically conditioned much more easily from their experiences. As a result, introverts often have higher amounts of conditioned inhibitions. Question 13c. Evolutionary theorists believe that the Big Five stand out as important dimensions of personality because of their what functions. Explanation. Evolutionary theorists believe that the Big Five stand out as important dimensions of personality because of their adaptive functions. Evolutionary theorists are interested in what has allowed humans as a species to survive. Extroversion is a dimension of the Big Five that motivates people to be in social settings. This would have provided early humans with added protection as well as the ability to explore and share food. These things increased chances of survival and allowed early humans to be flexible towards their environment. Question 13d. Dr. Stein is a behavioral geneticist conducting the following research. A group of adopted children and their adoptive parents receive a personality test that focuses on measuring neuroticism and extroversion. The children's biological parents receive the same test in the male. Dr. Stein is hoping to compare the degree to which the children's scores correlate with both sets of parents, but only a few biological parents have responded so far. While waiting for the remainder of the biological parents to respond, Dr. Stein decides to look at the correlation between the children and their adoptive parents. If Dr. Stein's findings support the biological perspective of personality development, which of the following graphs accurately illustrates her findings? Explanation. Graph 1 is correct. Findings that support the biological perspective of personality development are those that show higher correlations between groups of people that are genetically related. Adopted children are not biologically related to their adoptive parents, so the graph showing a low correlation between these groups illustrates Dr. Stein's findings. The closer a correlation is to 1.0, the greater the similarity between the two groups on the tray, with a correlation closer to 0 illustrating lower similarity between the groups. Graph 1 illustrates a lower correlation for both extroversion and neuroticism between adopted children and their adoptive parents. Question 14a. The authenticity of online profiles. Researchers have begun to analyze the level of truthfulness and the details of a person's online social networking OSN profile. One theory, the idealized virtual identity hypothesis, argues that people post content that reflects their ideal selves, not content that reflects their true personalities. A different theory, called extended real-life hypothesis, argues that OSN profiles are used to communicate one's true personality. Read this excerpts from a research project on Facebook, and answer the questions that follow. Question 14a. The data from this study support the extended real-life hypothesis. Based on this conclusion, which of the following trends must be true of the data collected? The profile owners' descriptions of what they would ideally like to be did not match their paper-based results. The observer ratings matched the profile owners' paper-based results more than the description of what they would ideally like to be. The profile owners' descriptions of what they would ideally like to be matched their paper-based results. The observer ratings matched the profile owners' descriptions of what they would ideally like to be more than their paper-based results. It's that the observer ratings matched the profile owners' paper-based results more than the description of what they would ideally like to be. Explanation. The extended real-life hypothesis argues that the personality type observed in an OSN profile accurately reflects the profile owner's actual personality. In this experiment, the profile owner's actual personality was measured by the paper-based personality test, and the personality type reflected by the OSN profile was based on observations made by undergraduate research assistants. These two pieces of data must reflect similar personality types for the real-life hypothesis to be supported. If the idealized virtual identity hypothesis had been supported, the profile owners' descriptions of how they would ideally like to be would have more closely matched the observer ratings. Question 14b. These data contradict the widely held assumption that OSN profiles are created to promote a more idealized version of the profile owner. The experimenters attribute these surprising results to the fact that other people have the capability to post or make comments on a profile owner's page. What insight did the researchers most likely gain by highlighting this characteristic of Facebook? The personality presented in a person's profile is reflective of how friends and family view the person. The functionality of Facebook, not the profile owners themselves, contributes to the accurate reflection in personality. Facebook administrators monitor profile content, ensuring that each individual profile reflects only one personality type. Profile owners often create two profile pages, one to reflect their personality more accurately, and one to create an idealized personality. It's the functionality of Facebook, not the profile owners themselves, contributes to the accurate reflection in personality. Explanation. By attributing the results to the fact that the profile owner is not the only contributor to the profile content, the researchers are highlighting the fact that the personality reflected by a Facebook profile isn't entirely under the owner's control. The posts and comments that friends and family make shape the content of a person's profile page, thus having an impact on the personality type interpreted from the profile content. This is not to say that a person's entire profile is reflective of how friends and family view the person. Rather, it is the subtle comments that these same friends and family members make that give more authenticity to the personality type presented by the profile content, reducing the likelihood that a profile owner could entirely restrict posted content in an effort to reflect an ideal personality type. That other people can comment on a person's profile page neither implies that Facebook administrators monitor profile content to ensure the reflection of one personality type nor leads to the conclusion that profile owners create two profile pages. Question 15a. Contemporary personality theories are taking more of a narrowed focus. Terror management theory is one of these theories and focuses on the repercussions of a person's awareness of the inevitability of death. Christelle hears a co-worker talk about a family member dying in a car accident. According to terror management theory, how will Christelle most likely reduce her anxiety in response to this event? Increase her feelings of worth by making a list of ways she is contributing to the world. Reduce her self-esteem by listing the things she could be doing to contribute to the world. Call her friends and see if they want to go out to dinner. Explanation. Increase her feelings of worth by making a list of ways she is contributing to the world is the correct answer. According to terror management theory, when your mortality becomes more salient, the best buffer against anxiety is to either increase self-esteem or strengthen your cultural worldview. Christelle, hearing a co-worker talk about the death of a family member, increased the salience of her mortality. In response, making a list of her contributions to the world would most likely raise her self-esteem. Question 15b. Dr. Stein is conducting research to compare the social responses of participants who have recently contemplated their mortality with those who have not. He has split his participants into two groups, Group A and Group B, and exposed only one group to an event that would cause them to contemplate their mortality. Dr. Stein then asks all of the participants to read a short story involving a character of a different ethnicity and religion than their own. After reading the story, participants were asked to describe the character in their own words. The following graph illustrates the results for both groups. Which group recently contemplated their mortality? Explanation. Group A is correct. Researchers have found that increasing the salience of mortality leads people to defend their cultural worldview. Specifically, researchers have found participants to engage in more stereotypic thinking about people from different religious or ethnic backgrounds. Group A came up with more descriptors that are consistent with stereotypes than Group B. Therefore, you can conclude that Group A recently contemplated their morality. Question 16. Culture and personality. Recent research efforts have focused on understanding the connections between culture and personality, and how one's cultural environment can influence the concept of self. The following is an example. Dr. Mjolordzi translates an English version of a Big 5 personality scale into Afrikaans. She then administers the scale to Afrikaans-speaking citizens, and performs factor analysis on the results. What 5 traits most likely surface for the Afrikaans citizens? Uprightness, extroversion, scrupulousness, vulnerableness, and enjoyableness. Openness, compulsiveness, introversion, friendliness, and receptiveness. Neuroticism, conscientiousness, openness, extroversion, and agreeableness. It's neuroticism, conscientiousness, openness, extroversion, and agreeableness. Explanation. Typically, translated personality scales that measure Big 5 traits in other cultures uncover the usual 5 traits: agreeableness, extroversion, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and openness. At this point, cross-cultural research tentatively supports the idea that the basic dimensions of personality structure are consistent across cultures. Question 17a. Understanding personality assessment. Cobus is talking to his dad about the benefits of taking personality tests. His dad is a psychologist and understands that personality tests are helpful in certain situations. For which of the following instances would Cobus's dad suggest that taking a personality test would be helpful? Trying to work out who his biological parents are, deciding what type of pizza toppings to get, being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. Explanation. Being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder is correct. Personality tests are most beneficial for a. Clinically diagnosing psychological disorders, b. vocational counseling, c. employee selection, and d. measuring personality traits in research settings. Being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder falls under clinically diagnosing psychological disorders. The following is a description of a personality test. Use this description to answer the next 2 questions. Marius is a member of a research study where the experimenter gives each participant a paper version of a personality test and instructs them to indicate how well each statement describes them. Which category does this personality test fall under? Productivity inventory, projective test, self-report inventory. Explanation. Self-report inventory is correct. Self-report inventories are a type of personality test where respondents answer questions about their consistent behavior patterns, or personality. They are termed self-report because people answer the questions for themselves and access private feelings for answers only they could know. Marius knows better than anyone the answers to these questions. Question 17c. Marius is talking to a friend the day after taking the personality test, and he reports the following about his experience. I knew what the personality test was trying to measure. I decided to entertain myself and intentionally not give any honest information about myself. Which of the following does Marius's report to his friend exemplify? Marius answering the questions in a way that increases social desirability. Marius systematically answering the questions in a way unrelated to the content. Marius deliberately deceiving the person giving out the personality test. Explanation. Marius deliberately deceiving the person giving out the personality test is correct. The weaknesses of self-report inventories most often stem from respondent behavior. Respondents may do any of the following. A. Intentionally answer dishonestly. B. Respond in ways that make them look good. And C. Answer questions in a way unrelated to the content. Marius's experience is an example of someone intentionally answering dishonestly.